Welcome to this webinar, which will attempt to describe and explain the link between children and young people's experience of sensory information and mental health difficulties. My name is Gareth, and I work in the Children and Young People's Wellbeing Practitioner team within Southwark Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. I will be speaking throughout the video, however feel free to pause at any point as there will be a summary of my main points on each slide. You are also welcome to pause at any point and take a break if needed. The video will last around 20 minutes. Our team focuses on early intervention support for emerging mental health difficulties for children and young people between 5 and 18 years old. We have noticed that a lot of young people are referred for early intervention mental health support due to the negative experiences they have interacting with certain sensory environments, including at home, school, and in the community. In the following webinar, I will attempt to provide an understanding of why we believe this is, and how it is important for all of us adults to consider the impact that our educational and living environments have on the young people who must go about their lives within them. This video will focus on experiences of neurodivergent young people and is aimed to provide an understanding based on our team's perspective of some of the accounts of people who have come through our service. Although there may be similarities and differences in the way that young people experience the places they live and the spaces they inhabit, no two individual ways of seeing the world are exactly the same, and this is a recognition of what has been termed neurodiversity. Individuals whose brains process information differently than the majority of the population would be defined as neurodivergent, and people who are the majority and process information similarly are called neurotypical. There is nothing wrong with being neurotypical or neurodivergent, however, due to experiencing the world in a way that has been falsely labelled as abnormal, neurodivergent people are often discriminated against, and as the video will go on to show, face unique mental health difficulties due to their position as a minority in society. Although not necessary, it is common for this group of young people to be classified as having certain conditions such as ADHD, autism, or dyslexia, and some of the young people we see will either be on a waiting list for or will have received a diagnosis of one of these. If you would like to find out more about ADHD or autism specifically, please refer to the resources at the end of the presentation. Neurodivergent children and young people are often more likely to feel anxiety in relation to how the environment around them is structured in terms of senses. As we shall see, this is usually because most environments have been designed to fit with sensory needs that are considered normal and oftentimes universal, that is, common to everyone. Unfortunately, however, what this everyone actually means is neurotypical people and neurotypical sensory needs. For neurodivergent young people, these environments may actually be experienced as uncomfortable, distracting, and even painful for the way their brains work. It is therefore no wonder why many young people may feel anxious about spending their days within these environments. To further explore what this anxiety often looks like, however, as well as how adults can help with it, we must first understand in more detail how individuals may possess differences in the way they experience sensory information. We each have 8 senses. These are sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, our sense of balance, the sense of where our body and the objects around are in space, and the sense of how our body feels internally. Although everyone experiences these senses in a slightly different way, it is common for neurodivergent young people to perceive some of them more or less intensely than many of the people around them. Input to these senses may therefore be experienced as very intense and present within awareness, or not very noticeable at all. Because of this, many children will try to balance things out by seeking input to an undersensitive sense, or by avoiding input to an oversensitive sense. This management of sensory information is helpful towards getting through the day. For example, a child may be undersensitive to sound and therefore may not acknowledge when someone calls their name. Similarly, someone else may experience tastes very intensely and therefore may prefer a plainer diet so that they are not overwhelmed by the taste of food when eating. For more detailed information about sensory perception for autistic people in particular, and many more examples of what specific sensory differences might look like, you can visit the website displayed on the screen. Feel free to pause the video and follow the link or search on Google. Although this particular organisation focuses on autism specifically, the resources section at the end of this presentation contains further links relevant to other conditions such as ADHD. Everyone must first process the information our senses are receiving before acting upon the environment we are in. This is important for us to get around in the world. We now understand, however, that due to experiencing senses intensely or being undersensitive, this management of sensory input is especially important for the successful navigation of environments for neurodivergent young people. Whereas for many people, a flickering light can perhaps easily be ignored when stepping into a room, this is not the case for some young people. Unfortunately, as previously mentioned, many environments that neurodivergent young people must work and live within have been designed in a way that does not make this management of sensory exposure easy to do. Quite often, sensory environmental output is standardized and difficult to modify for individual neurodivergent young people. For example, sitting down for a long period of time in a classroom might be difficult for someone who is ADHD and particularly sensitive to staying still. Similarly, a child may be very sensitive to bright overhead lights in this classroom, the kind of which are installed above them. This lighting could be distracting, uncomfortable, or even painful due to its intensity within this young person's experience. Similarly, another young person may find the busyness and noise of a corridor overwhelming. There is simply too much sensory information for this young person to act upon, and maybe they struggle to get into lessons on time because of this. Getting into a busy, smelly bus may be almost impossible for young people who experience these senses more intensely. Even at home, neurodivergent young people may be met with difficulties related to their senses. For example, if a sibling is playing loud music, or even if the bed sheets are changed to a different texture, this may distract a young person from being able to settle down to sleep. What these examples illustrate is that difficulties arise when elements in the environment impinge too greatly upon a young person's senses, or if the environment is not stimulating enough. This may lead to the development of mental health difficulties such as anxiety or low mood, especially when these environmental features cannot easily be modified by the young person, such as the standardized environments typical of most schools, and also in the community, and often sometimes at home. The senses can become too disruptive to an individual's life, and young people entering our service have even described experiencing physical pain when they are stuck in environments which are overwhelming their senses. When this is the case, many neurodivergent people are forced into a response detrimental to their mental health known as masking. This we shall explore now. As children and young people interact with the groups around them, they soon develop a sense of how they should behave to be accepted by others. For many neurodivergent people, this often means they must repress or hide the expression of parts of themselves that are considered strange, unusual, or different to what is acceptable. It is an unfortunate truth that bullying is a common reality for many neurodivergent children. People who stand out often get targeted by bullies, and as such, many young people are forced into hiding who they are. This response is called masking, and it often includes neurodivergent people sitting with or coping with exposure to sensory environments that are causing them pain and discomfort. This is often done because it's safer for them to avoid disrupting everyone else, or not to get a negative reaction from others, including those in positions of power, or to not draw attention to anything that may single them out as being different to others. For example, a child may find the sense of their body's position and internal feeling very distracting when sitting still. To avoid getting told off for annoying others at a family dinner, however, they try and sit still. This might be very difficult for them and very tiring, but they do it anyway to avoid getting told off. This is but one example of masking. Masking not only their sensory needs, but also all too often expressions of their interests and the way they see the world is very detrimental to a young person's developing sense of self and can lead to mental health difficulties. It is also an unfortunate truth that many neurodivergent children and young people are actually incentivized to mask by the rules, expectations, or more broadly speaking, the culture which surrounds them. Imagine you've been masking all day, trying to work in a room where the lights are burning into your eyes. The noise of other people coughing or talking has repeatedly disrupted your ability to concentrate, and you've had to travel home on a bus squashed up against other people. The cumulative effect of this sort of masking through continued exposure to sensory distress can often lead to 3 distinct impacts for neurodivergent young people. These are called the experience of meltdown, shutdown, and burnout. A sensory-related meltdown is when sensory information becomes too overwhelming for a child or young person, and they experience an instant and temporary surge in distressing feelings of panic, anger, or loss of control. This chaotic feeling can often be expressed verbally through shouting, screaming, or crying, or even through actions such as hitting out and biting. Meltdowns are obviously very difficult, uncontrollable experiences for young people to go through, and are sometimes confused for temper tantrums in younger children. For a first-person point of view simulation of what a sensory meltdown might feel like, you can follow the link on the screen, or just type in that title on YouTube and you should be able to find it. Just a warning, however, it is quite distressing video. Shutdown is often caused by the same things that cause meltdowns, including repeated exposure to overwhelming sensory environments. Rather than expressing the barrage of distressing feelings outwards, however, young people will direct them inside themselves and may withdraw from others and find it difficult to speak. As the difficult feelings remain hidden from the outside, shutdown can be very difficult to deal with, as young people may feel disconnected from others and unable to reach out for support. Finally, burnout can be described as a marked period of fatigue and inability to function which lasts for weeks to months at a time. It can be caused by neurodivergent people performing in stressful sensory environments for longer than their bodies can tolerate. We all experience some tiredness and drop in our energy levels after a hard week of work, but burnout is when a neurodivergent person has had to manage overwhelming sensory demands for too long, so much so that they experience a complete exhaustion of their capacity to manage any more demands. Quite often, these impacts of masking in sensory environments that are causing pain and discomfort are picked up on as evidence for mental health difficulties such as anxiety, low mood, or even taken as evidence for behavioural temperament problems. As we shall see, however, a helpful approach to supporting children and young people experiencing meltdown, shutdown, or burnout is to explore their sensory needs and whether or not these are being met. An unfortunate process has now been articulated. Natural differences in sensory perception are not taken into account by the design of some physical spaces. This causes pain and disruption for some young people who, due to it being too difficult for adaptations to be made, end up masking and keeping this pain hidden from others. As we now know, the cumulative impact of this masking can cause significant mental health difficulties for young people, including meltdown, shutdown, and burnout. It is often only at this point that young people are referred for mental health support, and the problem is sometimes contextualized as being something to do with how they, as individuals, are managing their behavior or their emotions. We now know, however, that often the cause of their distress has actually occurred a long time before it's picked up on, and has to do with their inability to change the environments they are in to better suit their own sensory needs. It is no wonder that children and young people will resort to total avoidance or masking to deal with harmful sensory environments, as these are often their only options. It is our role, and the role of all adults who have more power to make these changes, to ultimately give young people more options. We must understand and advocate for their needs, make necessary adaptations if we can, and empower young people to begin to be able to do this for themselves. Some tips on how this can be done are included now in our final section. Mental health support is often focused on fostering emotional regulation skills and building resilience for neurodivergent children and young people. Although this can sometimes help people cope with difficulties, the purpose of this video has been to highlight the cause of some of these difficulties, which is the detrimental impact of inflexible environments in terms of their sensory features. If you are interested in learning about different ways children and young people can help manage their own mental health, including calm and self-care strategies, please refer to our extended library of additional webinars which cover a wide range of audiences and needs. These can be found on the South London and Maudsley website, which is linked at the end of this presentation. We encourage an approach towards supporting children and young people which focuses on, firstly, understanding their individual sensory needs and then advocating for or directly implementing adaptations within their environment to match these needs. We believe that this preventative approach is an effective way to target the root of later mental health difficulties and reduce these. We can understand a child or young person's sensory needs by simply asking them about it. A good resource to help these conversations is a sensory profile worksheet, which can be found amongst the resources at the end of this presentation. These help children identify what senses they like and what senses they don't like, and is a helpful first step. Advocating for reasonable adaptations at school for children can be difficult, especially if they do not have an EHCP or a formal diagnosis. A key is to find a trusted member of staff at school, ideally who has a good relationship with the child, and see what changes can be made. For those with a diagnosis, there are legal requirements that must be followed. A link on the next slide can explain in more detail about specific legally required accommodations for children and young people with a diagnosis or with an EHCP. Voicing your child's sensory needs or the specific sensory differences they are experiencing with the school SENCO can be a powerful way to advocate for them. If you have the power to make changes to environments based on a neurodivergent young person's sensory needs, this should be done with their full input. Sometimes children and young people will be worried about impacting others, so it is important to consider their view on how adaptations can be made and how best to go about this. Even if it's something as simple as having 5 minutes with the lights off at the end of the day, small adaptations can have a big impact. Finally, the power of community should never be underestimated. It is unfortunate that many neurodivergent young people are quite isolated, and this is a barrier towards expressing sensory needs. Linking neurodivergent individuals with each other can be a great way to begin to foster strength and empowerment for young people to feel safe to express and advocate for themselves. Similarly, establishing a consistent, secure adult contact for children can begin to create the conditions necessary to address sensory difficulties that can often, as I have now attempted to demonstrate, lead to mental health difficulties later on. So these specific organisations provide a number of helpful resources and advice around advocating for the needs of neurodivergent children and young people. There's a particular focus on school. Feel free to pause, take a screenshot, or type these organisations into Google to have a look for more information. We hope you have found this webinar informative and helpful towards better understanding mental health difficulties that may be related to sensory differences. For more information and organisations that can offer further support, you may pause the video now and take a note of the presented information and the organisations on this slide. If you or anyone else requires urgent mental health support, please contact emergency services, attend your nearest A&E, or use the crisis support lines, which can be found on the South London and Maudsley NHS website. Thank you for watching.